If you're vulnerable to psychic damage from roguish language, stay away from these gibbering mouths. But if you intend on listening to this podcast about enriching your fantastical group hallucinations, you're too far gone already.
We are the brothers, both DMs and players. I'm the one that does a make-em-up tune on the old ukulele once in a while, Jordan.
And I'm the one who can't keep a beat to save Jordan's life, Travis.
And I wish this weren't a scenario where my life was on the line.
It happens.
Welcome to the Hook and Chance podcast, jamming you sweet tunes with a magical lute for incredible games.
Today we are talking about bards, those jammy, inspiring folk, and I do love me a bard.
Bards can be pretty incredible.
I think they can also fall into the category of hated among tables.
Easily. I was once one of those.
Like, bards are a really divisive class, I think, for a lot of people.
It was easy for me to blow it off when I first started playing as something that I just wasn't interested in.
Yeah.
Like, oh, nah, I want to be a fighter, a warrior, a head chopper, a spell slinger.
Literally anything else.
Yeah.
But I think bards can be really friggin' sweet if you take the time to flesh them out and give them a lot more going on than just being that character that kind of jams a lick on a guitar and it's just like, wah! And then like casts some weird spell.
The lute, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you don't really connect how the music makes the magic.
And actually, I think there was a incredible writer that had a really great quote about the power of bards.
Yeah, Alan Moore says, you piss off a bard and forget about putting a curse on you. He might put a satire on you. And if he was a skillful bard, he puts a satire on you, it destroys you in the eyes of your community. It shows you up as ridiculous, pathetic, worthless in the eyes of your family, in the eyes of your children, in the eyes of yourself. And if it's a particularly good bard, and he's written a particularly good satire, then 300 years after you're dead, people are still going to be laughing at what a twat you were.
Yeah.
That's power.
That is. If Alan Moore didn't immediately jump to mind, he is the writer of V for Vendetta and Watchmen and Swamp Thing and a million other amazing works.
He knows his stuff.
He knows his bards. And I have a guest character that I love. It just turned into a favorite. Like, I was never huge on bards myself, and I created one and I started playing in this one kind of side game. And very quickly and sneakily became one of my favorites. I just liked the concept because it had elements in it that I could play both in combat and in role-playing and lots of other areas and aspects of a fully fleshed out bard. And I took some time to actually create him. And in the end, he was actually kind of a goblin Jon Stewart who was angry at an usurper in his clan and so did a 5 nights a week news update on. So he was a College of Satire bard.
Awesome. Late night talk show hosts are definitely the bards of our day. Like they
Totally
sway the minds, yeah. So the loose definition, and for people that are new to bards, they're described typically as singers, poets, songwriters, which is why a lot of first bards end up pulling out classic rock videos.
So I'm not knocking that playstyle. You know, if you dig pulling up YouTube videos for combat of Thunderstruck or whatever, AC/DC before you go into combat, that's fine. But that's kind of the rudimentary idea of what a bard is. It's just, that's what your initial image is like, oh, I've got a guitar, let me jam out while we go into combat. But it's kind of like stage one, and bards can be a lot more than that.
And it has the potential to derail whatever scene you're kind of trying to create, so be careful with that.
Yeah, like as soon as everyone rolls initiative and you're like, hold on, let me just pull up my phone. And then everyone's kind of waiting for that. And then a YouTube ad plays.
Is your vacuum sucky?
And there's like, oh, okay, just like five more seconds on this ad. And then we'll get to the Thunderstruck. Oh no, it's Fire in the Flames again.
My phone's dead. Oh shit.
Okay, but wait, here comes the guitar solo. I think for people playing bards, there's always this expectation that you have to be really charismatic, that you have to be musical of some sort. And I think that's why YouTube ads get played while you're trying to pull up music is just because there's there's that expectation that isn't there for the rest of the classes. Like,
Yeah.
if you play a barbarian, you don't have to know how to actually swing a sword to describe what's happening.
You don't have to get up and act out your fighting style.
Exactly. But with role-playing, you do have to be that charismatic person because you're role-playing that.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of an extra challenge when it comes to playing a bard.
I think if you're supporting someone playing a bard as another member of the party, I think it can really help to bring out the potential of that bard by not calling them on that and forcing them to say something in character that's epic, but just kind of allowing them to say something like, I recite a tale of heroes that came before in a similar situation, and my energy rises, and I pass by every party member reciting a passage that's significant to them. By the end, I'm standing tall in front of the group, and the energy created is unstoppable. Like, I think that's more powerful than me trying to sit here and say, all right, the tale of Vadric the Excellent was one where he was super strong, and he fought bravely. That's bad.
Well, and that inspirational speech that you just gave sounded a little bit like you prepared for it, had you not?
I did.
Okay.
I'm a cheater.
I think that's the whole point here, is that we can't be charismatic on the spot.
Yeah.
We have to put some thought into how we're going to play bards. So we're going to start with Archives of the Ancients, where we talk about where bards originally come from, because there's actually a shit ton of lore there that's really cool.
Absolutely. So much more than we can dive into here, but we'll dip our toes into it.
Just do a little dip, a little side dip.
Then we'll do Strategy Stateroom as our second segment, which approaches a lot of different ways to roleplay a bard, like we're saying, that don't involve a lute.
Absolutely. And then we're going to finish off with Kinship Camp with a few concepts that we built and prepared for one another.
Because character building is awesome.
And fun.
Yeah.
And I'll use any excuse I have to make another one. Okay, on to the next segment.
This is the Archives of the Ancients, where knowledge is unearthed to add wild insights to our world.
Okay, so let's start with the history of bards and where they actually came from.
Real world history we're talking about.
Yeah, like bards were a thing, if you didn't know. Bards originally come from Irish, Scottish, and Welsh histories as keepers and orators of lore and history. You might remember we had the law keeper, the law speaker in one of our past episodes in Icelandic history, and bards were kind of similar in the sense that they were the people that remembered and told stories as a part of their profession. They kept history alive. So bards, the whole idea about like bard colleges, bards really did go to college. There were bard colleges that took more schooling than most modern doctors get.
So they were super pros.
Oh, yeah.
They knew their tale.
They did not, this was not a thing that you kind of did as a side hustle. You were not a side hustle bard. You dedicated more than 12 years to learn to recite stories verbatim, because it was understood that playing the telephone game when it came to important family histories was not a good thing to do. So you had to learn more than 350 stories.
Wow.
Hundreds of poems by the time you were done your bard college training.
That's a good point, eh? Because that's where all of the monsters of D&D come from, is just people that saw a goat cough and then it turned into a dragon. I'm saying the telephone game of you have to recite the stories word by word.
Well, that's
for word.
The whole where like mermaids came from, like everyone.
Yeah. The fish, half a fish and a woman on a rock.
Yeah, the whole it just spiraled via telephone game and Leviathans. Actually, the other one that I heard a little while ago was where krakens and sea monsters came from, is that whales, when they mate, flip upside down. And so male whales just have this big pink dick sticking above the...
Great.
Yeah, and then sailors saw that and were just like, oh my God, you would not believe the otherworldly shit that I've seen.
Oh no. That's horrific.
That's
more
where
horrific.
It came from.
I would rather see a kraken. That's awful. They made up a nicer reality.
Yeah. Krakens were the sunny side of that story. So yeah, essentially that bards were the caretakers of these stories. Another really interesting fact about bards is that during their training, they would actually use sensory deprivation. They were among the first recorded to use sensory deprivation to actually like lock in these stories. So they would memorize in complete and total darkness as a way to really hyper focus on the memorization of these stories.
No distractions there.
Yeah, they were gnarly.
Bards couldn't exist today, is what you're saying.
No,
because we all have phones.
We have attention spans that are very short. Another really cool thing was that Irish bards carried sticks or branches with bells on it. And you would get a different colored stick, silver, bronze, or gold stick.
Who doesn't want that? Stick with bells on it.
Okay, it sounds silly, but it's actually really cool because the application of such was when they strutted into a room and you heard the bells. So crowded long hall, bard walks in and all of their bells start to jingle.
Yeah.
And the more bells you hear, like this absolute din of bells, you were like, oh shit, I better shut the fuck up because this person is about to drop some knowledge.
Huh.
Yeah.
Just a cacophony of bells.
Yeah.
That's great. How many was the max? Do you know?
I don't know. I'm sure it was pretty intense because like...
Bell bard.
Yeah, bell bard. There's another concept. And then kind of finally, if you were a lord, you would patron a bard. And you would commission them to create stories around your family history. However, like Alan Moore kind of alluded to, if you didn't pay that bastard, he would mess up your family history. If you wanted a eulogy and you didn't pay for that eulogy properly, all of a sudden that eulogy has a very different vibe to it.
Jeez.
That's more of a satire.
So you really didn't want to get on the wrong side.
Yeah, they were like... They were like the verbal gunslingers of their times. They would just roam around and tell stories.
So you're saying that they're not the goofy minstrels that most of us think of them as? That people just like brush off and
basically.
Yeah.
Like they're friggin' smart. They're really well versed.
Yeah.
And this is kind of where that charisma came from. And they had memories of a steel trap. Like you didn't mess with those bastards.
So they're almost like diving into the wizard category, at least as far as our stereotypes go, is like they're diving into being super knowledgeable and well-read, so you could almost play them more scholarly.
Absolutely. And they were travelers. So like that's, I think also where the jack of all trades kind of came from is that way that bards just had to be good at everything and they were super smart and well educated and all of that. Plus they knew how to defend themselves if they had to because they were travelers and they would be put in dangerous situations all the time.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. Bards kind of had a druidic sense to them in the same way that druids would be nature-based protectors of the realm. Bards were considered more the druids and protectors of the written world and histories and they almost considered that like a holy ability, very similar to say like a cleric or a druid. They were protectors of this craft.
Interesting. And so they were tied right into the lore of druids as well, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's actually some interesting tidbits to pull from the history of the class in Dungeons & Dragons too, and kind of the evolution of it through each edition. That first edition seemed pretty confusing when I was first reading it until I was hearing you talk about all this druidic connections, because the theme of the first edition Bard was a druidic lore master. And you couldn't actually take a level in it until you were level 5 in both fighter and thief, and then you could start training under a druid to become a bard.
Holy shit.
So it was like elite class.
You had 3 classes that all contributed, and you had to be at least level 10 before you could even consider starting to become a bard.
Yeah, because bards know their shit. They're not just level 1s. And then second edition, they became less specific as far as all that bardic training and your prerequisites. They were a cultural storyteller. And this is where they started to become a jack of all trades. Bard was actually under the rogue tree in second edition, and they could cast almost as well as a wizard. They could fight well and had a lot of skills. Then you get into the third edition where they become that wandering minstrel that we think of today. The entertainers, sometimes they had the leader bent to them.
Yeah, that's entirely what I was just talking about, is basically the the bards. Like they have every element of what bards were in those first 3 versions of.
Yeah, it dips into all of that real world history, and then we start picturing him as this traveling fancy pants with a lute, with the poofy pants. And so yeah, in that 3rd edition, there were still jacks of all trades, and their magic no longer needed a spell book. Then in the 4th edition, they kind of go back to that respected and revered experts. They were thought of more as a leader, a party leader. They still had tons of skills. And then, of course, 5th edition, which we're playing now, they were knowledgeable travelers that know the magic of sound.
And they basically kind of became, I don't know where that really took that shift. I suppose it was a slow shift over the last 5 versions of Bards in D&D. But now we've kind of arrived at the expectation of every bard to basically be Dandelion from The Witcher.
Yeah, almost.
Who's just like a handsome, charismatic.
He's kind of a ladies' man somehow, even though that's a very go-to personality for a bard.
Yeah. Bards can be leaders. They're powerful in every and any way
that you want
they
them
really
to be.
want.
Yeah. They're tacticians, historians.
They can sway minds and hearts of people very carefully and powerfully through entertainment.
Absolutely. Like, having power over crowds is huge.
And I should say not necessarily entertainment, but art. And that is what art has always done. A bard isn't necessarily a musician. It's just an artist that has a way of expressing themselves through whatever their art might be. And that is how governments get toppled.
Yeah.
In a lot of real world cases is through art.
Yeah, so the core of the class is that bards are keepers of tradition and lore, and they do so in an entertaining, charismatic way. And there's a lot of simple concepts that you can use for how a bard carries on traditions and lore and tells stories through all kinds of avenues.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move on to the strategy stateroom where we'll try to put a bit more of this into actual practice.
Yeah, make it usable rather than just us gabbing.
Proselytizing.
This is the strategy stateroom, where inventive and cunning tactics are crafted for when they're needed most.
We wanted to go through how we thought it made sense to build a bard, and here's a few steps that kind of make sense of it.
The first one being just come up with a cool background for your bard. Not necessarily a gimmick, like when the player comes to the DM and is just like, hey, can my butt be a musical instrument that I can use? Because that's not going to play itself out over a long period of time. That's going to be a one-note Johnny. The second point being putting those gimmicks, and this is how we can kind of test our own gimmicks and our own concepts, is putting that gimmick for your bard through the ringer, and then the final part is just kind of prepping inspiration. So when your bard does go into their shtick, whatever that might eventually be, that you have something kind of prepped for it. And we'll go through each one of these points.
So 5th edition has a part of building a character called the backgrounds, and it provides you with all these ideas for getting started with your character. And I think with a bard, it's super easy to just go down the entertainer road when there's so many more options that can lend to interesting bards.
Well, and it's logical that you would choose the entertainer because if you're creating a bard, you might have already kind of had that idea in your head that you're going to be a person that plays that instrument. And so entertainer is just the first and most logical step.
Yeah, naturally fits.
But if you choose some different backgrounds, they add a lot more depth to a bard and start getting those wheels rolling.
The literal first background in the book is acolyte.
The first one that comes to my mind would be like a spokesperson. The person that is trying to gain kind of leverage within a community for either a noble who's running for office or a church or something like that. You could be like a spokesperson.
Specifically for a religion, since that's what acolytes are all about.
Well, I mean, certainly acolytes could be acolytes of really anybody.
True. I always forget what acolyte actually means.
I mean, in the book, it definitely lends itself more towards a religious scholar.
Yeah. You could be one of those fervorous religious zealots that just yells on the corner.
Ooh, I like that.
Gets on a box and is really good at those passionate nonsense speeches.
Have you heard the good word of the Foot Clan? I think you could take it the one step further. I like the Doomsdayer.
Yeah, always talking about end times are coming.
Yeah.
That could inspire your allies and seriously
Yeah, what
demoralize your enemies.
you're just running into battle and you're like, Doom!
Your end days are here.
Freaking the enemy out. And then your allies are just like, yeah, he's a little bit nuts, but he's really helpful.
If you can find a reason to get off the corner, of course, to start your adventure.
What about a criminal?
A criminal bard could definitely be a distraction if that's how they committed their crimes with people before, is they distracted and their buddies stole. That could be kind of cool because then you don't actually have to commit a lot of crimes, but you could have the expectation that your party would, and if they don't, then that's a role-playing opportunity.
What about a criminal that had knowledge just like that kind of lore keeper, but they kept lore of all criminal activity? So they were like the linchpin to everything, all the criminal activity in the city. So they had that, that kind of knowledge.
So they start out with a lot of knowledge that the rest of the party would want to get from them, kind of thing.
Potentially, or at least have like any kind of, your DM might give you advantage on knowledge checks to be like, have I heard of this particular criminal that we're after?
Yeah.
And do I know the deeds that they were,
that's true.
Had been done?
You know all of the legends of criminals.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
How about, let's just pick another one. How about folk hero?
A folk hero bard could create personal legends for party members easily.
Yeah. Or themselves. They could, oh, there you go. So the folk hero bard isn't actually much of a folk hero, but is so convincing and charismatic that they make up all kinds of legends about themselves as to kind of pump that up.
So they're using their charisma to make up a lot of lies. And
I mean, it sounds a little bit more like a criminal at this point.
Yeah.
Or could wander into towns before some groups, and they're sitting there trying to pump up the rest of the group. So there you've got that inspiration side of things.
How about the hermit?
Interesting. A hermit.
But I think that you could have them be an artist, one of those kinds of artists that kind of spends a lot of time by themselves crafting something incredible that tells stories like tapestries or clothing or small carvings.
Yeah, they could be working on a blanket that has, like, they've intricately woven their own story into.
Yeah, and you could actually play a bard of few words.
That'd be cool. Yeah, if like your one character's prized possession after a battle, you used, needlepoint basically to make scenes depicting your own life.
Yeah.
And your party's life.
Your party's HQ could be covered in badass tapestries.
I went to like Granny's quilts. Like every square has another story of brave Sir Robin.
You could definitely just play your grandma. She's a bard.
Okay, soldier. How would you play a soldier bard?
I think soldiers actually, in my mind, lend themselves pretty well to bards. It's kind of weird, but you can have them directing troops on battlefields, keeping time. Real armies had people that played trumpet to do just that.
You could work in the lore of being historians with knowing battle tactics and communicating that via music.
Absolutely. That one does require some pre-planning and actually understanding some battle tactics. But even if you had a couple or a few that you went between.
So that's where some of those abilities would actually come from, is the ability to cast, say, like a buff spell would have that element to it of, yeah, I'm like directing the battlefield. And in that way, you've just basically granted your, advantage, like bards do, on certain checks.
I wonder if you could actually play a bard that's a leader without restricting your party's choices as much.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
they can still do what they want, but you're
not actually telling them where to go on the battlefield, but you're giving them advantage on some of their checks.
For sure.
Which means that you're helping them and you're directing them, and that's just part of the flavor.
I like that. Obviously, your party has to be cool with it too, but...
What about Urchin?
Urchin is probably my favorite background. I think it works for everything. I don't know why I love it so much.
So give me a pitch on an Urchin bard.
Well, I recently watched Kubo and the Two Strings, and I thought that was the perfect Urchin bard. he had come from a cave, lived with his mother,
Totally.
and he went into town every day and he told these really cool stories with his little lute and his little paper figures that he would magically make move around. And
Could also work for the hermit.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Comes into town and busks,
Yeah.
performs.
That totally works. Cool. So I don't know. I would say bards you can use any background with a bard and have it influence a lot more than just a simple floofy pantsed, colorful, charismatic bard. Because, if you did that Kubo and the Two Strings style bard, they wouldn't have to necessarily be charismatic. They wouldn't necessarily have to fall into all the same traps that I think bards always do.
So after coming up with one of these concepts, we got to work on it a little bit more, yeah?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the trick to doing so is really just putting it through the ringer, looking at it from all angles. And I think what I mean by this is we really have to take that bard concept. So, like, we can take one of the ones that we just came up with and look at it from both the role-playing aspect and from the combat aspect. Because, yeah, not all bard concepts and gimmicks really hold up in both capacities. So, you come up with a cool idea as to how a bardic ability plays out in combat, but then it never comes up in role play.
Yeah, and you're the quiet bard all of a sudden?
Yeah, and I think where you have a good bard gimmick or concept comes from being able to see that play out in both scenarios and always being able to use it in one way or another. So,
Doomsdayer.
Yeah, you want to...
Because that's fun.
You want to do the Doomsdayer. If we had kind of the corner yeller, doomsdayer, prophet kind of person, should we give him a god?
Well, let's just go with one of the basic ones of the D&D pantheon, which is Pelor, god of the sun.
Yeah, okay. Pelor works.
Simple. I think that in roleplay, you can just connect other characters' actions to the virtues of Pelor.
Yeah, I think you could almost be a cleric of Pelor at this point, because we're kind of like dipping into both.
Yeah.
But not just clerics need to be into certain gods.
And not only clerics worship gods.
Exactly. So now you've got a bard that worships Pelor that talks about or connects all of their companions' behaviors to the virtues of their own god. And yeah, I mean, you could simply at the table, you just have a list of some of those virtues.
Yeah.
You just do a little research on Pelor and be like, yeah, he digs this. He doesn't, and now you have a list that every single time you're like, Pelor smiles upon you. And so that right there is something you could do to grant advantage as a part of a bardic buff.
Yeah, that bardic inspiration.
Yeah.
Yeah, anytime you notice someone do something you like, exemplifies Pelor, that'd be good too.
Yeah.
Because it would encourage other players to think about your player's perspective in order to get your bardic inspiration.
Totally. Now you've got it coming from a number of different areas. And also, if you were a doomsdayer of Pelor, which doesn't sound very congruous now that I'm saying it out loud.
Well, neither do some real things out there.
Fair enough. Yeah. Maybe your character's unique take on Pelor is that he's going to bring about the end of the world. Anyways, you could really exemplify that in your character's actions also. So now you're a bard that doesn't really believe that there's any permanence to the world. And so you are rather brave bard in doing so because, heck, you're probably going to die next. And speaking of which, that would also be a lot of fun to play a bard who keeps singing and talking about the end times, just like the Mayan calendar thing. There's always just a minor misadjustment or a minor miscalculation to the actual end times. So you're constantly like, it's coming next week. And then when you come back to play next week,
have your date chosen.
Yeah, how you're...
And then that morning it's just like, well, this is why this was wrong, but I'm definitely got it this time.
Yeah. And that could be a lot of fun to play, kind of a recurring, and that's, so now that gimmick has more depth and it has a little bit more improvement there. So the other side of things though is the combat. So how would basically a Doomsday Bard play that out in combat?
As a Doomsdayer Bard, you got to have some cool stuff to say because that's where your power is coming from, invoking kind of your weird, overly intense belief about your god.
Yeah, but similar to being charismatic, you can't just be like if you're not naturally a charismatic person, you can't come up with that on the spot. Are you prepared to do that on the spot?
Well, I don't think it takes that much prep, so give me 5. We'll be right back.
Okay.
All right, so there's a really cool tool that I like to use for bards that doesn't have anything to do with them, but it's awesome. It's called Inspirobot, and some guys put together an AI that creates inspirational quotes. And so using those quotes that don't normally make any sense, for example, limited talent disintegrates limitedly, or if someone tells you that you can never educate someone, prove them wrong. They almost sound real, just about the structure of them. So if you use those and you put in some words related to whatever you're doing, I think that creates some cool phrases for bards.
That was honestly pretty quick that you were able to do that. I had never heard of Inspirobot before. It was pretty good.
So yeah, inspirobot.me. We'll put a link in the show notes. Here's some that I got for a Doomsdayer of Pelor that you could use when you're casting spells or you're demoralizing your enemies.
Can I do the first one?
Absolutely.
Rejoice, for your soul will be cleansed by the righteous.
There you go. See, that sounds like it comes from some scripture. Stand tall before the light. Do not bow to those who work from shadows.
Wow, that's good. I like that. Well, what about actually applying these to real bardic abilities that you would use in combat?
Yeah, absolutely. So what? What are you thinking?
Well, honestly, any of these work for like half, if not more, of the bard's abilities. I'm thinking cutting words. So your cutting words could be something like that. When you are running in, so for those of you unfamiliar, cutting words basically you cut away at an enemy's any bonuses that they get. So essentially you're just using your abilities to counter their abilities, but it's in the phrasing of cutting words. You can essentially use one of these lines to call out to your enemies and like, the end is nigh, your fight is worthless.
Yeah, you've got tons of spells like Vicious Mockery.
Dissonant Whispers, that one's juicy. You could totally add something just N times E to Dissonant Whispers.
Absolutely. Laugh at your own demise, for it shall come just as swiftly as if you did not.
Damn. Oh, that's a...
I actually made that one. That could be for Dissonant Whispers, but I actually had Tasha's Hideous Laughter in mind.
Hell yeah.
The one where you make somebody uncontrollably laugh.
Oh, God. No, I don't like that. That's horrifying.
That's a doomsdayer, man.
Because if they don't make the save, then they actually start laughing.
Yeah.
God damn it, that's messed. And this was just with a little bit of prep.
Fleshing out cool spells and attacks as a bard is doable.
Cool. So the final point is exactly that. Prep some bardic inspiration for when it's needed. This just kind of fits with our whole player episode, which is before you walk into a combat or you even start the game. D&D has a DM spend hours prepping sometimes days.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Players can take 10 minutes before a game, do a little bit of their own prep, come up with some of these. If you're playing the Doomsdayer Bard, you can sit down and come up with a little bit of prep around, yeah, this is some of the crazy heinous shit that I'm going to say in this game.
Yeah.
I'm going to quickly jot it down.
It's going to stay in character for me.
If you don't walk in prepped, you're going to end up, and this is how you always hear, like, the DM throws it to the player to say, like, okay, you're gonna buff your allies. How do you do that? And then somebody just sits there blankly for a moment and goes,
get him.
Yeah.
Go
it's either going to be a
him.
pop culture reference or it's just going to be a vague, like, yay, team.
Unless you're way more talented than us, then bravo. But this isn't for you.
That's really where this comes from, is just sit down and think about how your bard, how that actually plays out in combat, in role playing, How do they use their abilities? Maybe they do carry a lute, but they strum once for dramatic effect, and then they give you a really gnarly phrase that, eats away at your resolve.
You could even make a custom phrase for every ally of yours. That wouldn't take an incredibly long time, but then, yeah, it feels like you're actually talking to the characters.
So you could have a bard that introduces the party kind of like somebody would introduce Daenerys Targaryen in Game of Thrones with this long honorific title.
Yeah, just a slew of accomplishments.
Yeah, like you are the harbinger of the party itself and boost their intimidation or persuasion rolls.
Yeah, and that'd be cool to have a growing list of your party members' deeds.
Yeah, like if I were DMing, I would probably grant advantage on any kind of charisma check when your entire party walked into a tavern, but the bard went in beforehand and said, "Let me present the," everyone at the tavern would be like, "Holy shit, these folks are serious."
Yeah, kind of like that bell and a stick concept from the real bards.
Exactly. Yeah. Holy shit.
I think I ended up reading about this one, so I'm not going to take credit for it. But this is just, I laughed at this concept. A bard that has a magic baby.
Wait, what?
Follow me here.
Okay.
A baby in combat is inspiring to your allies because they don't want the baby to get killed. Because it's a baby. And enemies are either morally opposed to attacking or are intimidated by the screaming, or just intimidated by the psycho that brings a baby into combat.
Oh, yeah. All right. So
Keep that baby safe.
There's a lot of different approaches that I think you could take with a bard. So let's move on to our final segment where we're actually going to flesh out a bard.
All right.
This is Kinship Camp, where rich histories and diverse quirks are explored between weary adventurers around the safety of the fire.
So in this segment, we are going to pitch each other some character concepts that we have prepared. In this exercise, we kind of both took to figuring out how their bardic abilities played out both in combat and roleplay scenarios, just like we did in the last segment. May I do the honors? Go first?
For it. Get started.
Okay. So my character concept is going to be a writer who is documenting the lives and the adventures of the party. They consider themselves to not really be the heroic type or the adventurous type, but in meeting the party for the first time, was so inspired to document their adventurous lives that they follow them around. They feel like their quests need some kind of documentation or lore keeping. They think the individuals of the party are so incredible that they're just their biggest fan.
Yeah, that's fun to roleplay and fun for the other players because it's making it about them.
And you can have a lot of fun being that, like, almost a sidekick, but of course, when combat breaks out, you have to get in there and get involved because it's about everyone surviving. Yeah, the way I kind of approach role-playing as this character is you could just call out the cool stuff that the party does all the time. So say you are trying to get information in a tavern. Your person, your character, is actually getting in on and granting inspiration to all of these roleplay scenarios by, the party barbarian is trying to get information out of the bouncer at this tavern. You walk up and your bard says, "Do you know who this person is? This person slaughtered the basilisk of the dripping caves," or whatever the case may be.
You could even have little pamphlets of stories to hand out to NPCs. I think that would add weight to it. It's read this tale.
Yeah, read this tale of their adventures.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could take notes, like in character and out of character, take notes on each of the characters' greatest moments and their biggest victories, and talk to them and speak to what your character saw in character in that moment.
Yeah.
And relay that back in any time during playing that character. So then I stopped and I said, okay, we're going to take this to the combat side. So how does this play out in combat? So before casting spells, you could recount again those heroic deeds to your party members. When you're trying to grant them an inspiration die,
Buff them up in some
buff
way.
them up,
with
some kind of advantage, you could tell them about that time that they almost died last time. Say, you've been through worse. Get up, fight harder.
You came back from the brink of death.
Yeah.
You were unfrozen by a basilisk.
I really like the idea of narrating like this writer who is constantly kind of like speaking to themselves in an effort to memorize what they're seeing and what they're doing so they can write it into their novel later.
Okay, yeah.
So
you're almost narrating the combat as it's taking place.
Exactly.
That's
exactly.
cool.
Yeah. So this party's rogue is sneaking around to try and get a flank on somebody. They're saying, Magarith snuck silently around the enemy in order to stab it in the back. So you're kind of throwing these dramatic flair onto everything that the rest of the party does.
Nice. You could do a lot with that, yeah.
Yeah. And I even prepped a little quote. So again, if you prep the kind of cool stuff that your bard can say in combat or even out of combat, but I was thinking for inspiration, just one of the many lines that you could kind of pre-prepare. I am writing the story of your deeds, and that story is not a tragedy. Prevail.
Nice. That's good.
Yeah. Cool. So that's my writer.
Awesome.
What do you got?
My concept was around being frightening and unpredictable. Because I think that's just awesome. I was learning a little bit about Blackbeard.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you know his deal, but he wasn't actually much of a killer.
I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah. He focused more on his intimidation to demoralize his enemies before his ship even got there. When he did get there, he'd do stuff like light these, I don't know exactly what it was. I've seen different depictions, but he would light something on fire in and around his beard and his face. And that would create this smoky cloud that you'd see Blackbeard's eyes come through, and he walks out of this cloud and he's the demon walking towards you, boarding your ship, and good God, I'm out.
Yeah.
I'm laying down.
I now know what to do with the ever-smoking bottle.
Yes, there you go. Just hold it in your mouth.
Yeah. Put it down your shirt.
You can take inspiration from interesting rituals that take place all over the world. Like, for example, the Haka rituals of the New Zealand traditions. The core concepts of them are about intimidation and just
Hell yeah.
amping up your own group. The rugby team performs it at the beginning of every match, and it's really cool to watch. Check it out.
That's cool. Yeah, totally.
But yeah, if you just take the idea behind that, I think that can make for powerful movements in game.
Totally. Like when you're in the middle of combat, yeah, you're like throwing menacing faces. Like I love in the Haka. Yeah, they're all about like really quick movements and really powerful stances and things like that.
Yeah.
So all you have to do is really describe that.
Mm-hmm. In roleplay, the way that I've seen Blackbeard depicted is that he was a pretty reasonable guy other than when he was being intimidating. So you could almost have like two personas that a bard would do on purpose. It's not like some kind of split personality thing. It's like they are intentionally creating two personas, one that's very reasonable, well-spoken, calm, collected. And then when it's time to perform in some way, whether it be persuasion or intimidation, it's like then they put on the mask of
100%. And it could even be a mask. My mind immediately went to those ridiculous hats that have hair that goes with them. So you could have that in your bag and you're like, all right, time to be this person.
Yeah.
And now you're just an absolute freak show of a character in combat.
Yeah. And then, of course, this one could be a musician, but we're not going to use a regular instrument. I found the death whistle, which is amazing.
Definitely fits with the character that you were already creating.
Yeah. So in the 1990s, brief history, in Mexico City, scientists found an ancient Aztec temple with the remains of a human in it. The human was beheaded with its arms crossed over its chest and had small objects in each hand. These small objects were little whistles that came to be known as death whistles because of the insane screeching, like it sounds like somebody or something giving out its final, just powerful scream. And it's because of the way that the whistle's designed.
Good Lord.
It's horrific to hear. And you can hear people that have tried to recreate them and play them if you look them up on YouTube.
Should we throw the sound effect in here, or is that too freaking awful?
It might be too unsettling. It's
yeah.
Maybe I'll give it a quick.
I don't even know if we should throw it in here. Go look it up on YouTube.
Yeah.
We don't want people driving and listening to this, like crashing their car or something.
But imagine that, like, getting off, like you're all sneaking up to an enemy. Imagine just like blasting that and then
hell no,
running in hot.
Oh my God.
Oh, that'd be great. It could be used in so many situations.
Or just, when stealth is broken, like when the party is sneaking up and you're like, uh-oh, game's up. DMs is like, roll initiative, and you're like, the first thing I do is toot this death whistle to death.
Toot.
Toot.
That's the right word to describe a death whistle. Let me give it a toot. So there you go. Yeah,
I dig it.
Frighten Bard.
Well, we did a little digging on Reddit too, and man, there's some good concepts.
Absolutely.
That other people have come up with. One of the ones that I found, trying to go the opposite direction of typical bards and like exact polar opposite. Reddit user Vandrin went with, I'm going to quote the actual post here, a calm, dark-clothed, asexual bard that whistled methodically. And I thought that was kind of cool because like you've got somebody that is just placid all the time, unsettlingly so.
Yeah, for sure.
And like just kind of one of those lilting whistles that has, think of the character from Kill Bill.
Yeah.
Like something like that would be pretty unsettling in either regard. I even liked the note of the asexual nature of that character, in that bards are usually like these sexy, charismatic,
and they're trying to bang
hit
everybody.
On everyone. Yeah. And so what if that character just showed no interest in anyone and you couldn't discern what their motivations were?
Yeah.
They were just this unsettling bard. I thought that was pretty cool.
Absolutely. That could create for some tense moments for sure.
Another one was made by Reddit user Grumbies, a tiefling bard who's basically like a jester and is in their work persona a tailor, and they collect patches and representations of the stories of the people that she's met.
Okay.
You've got very similar to bardic lore keepers and where their real world history came from. You've got a bard that makes clothes with patches of everyone's story, and each patch represents some kind of story that could be reiterated and retold, but is constantly kind of collecting it. So there you've got your colorful bard that actually collects all of their stories within the clothes that they actually wear.
You could actually use some of your spells to animate those from time to time, kind of drawing a little bit of inspiration from Moana, the Disney movie.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's always talking to his tattoos and stuff.
Yeah. That'd be pretty cool. Yeah. So that's just a couple of really cool Reddit ideas. Definitely, if you're struggling to make a bard, search what other people have come up with on Reddit. There's some really creative.
Yeah. There's some great ideas. And I know that multiple times we've been referencing pop culture already. We've talked about characters, but there's way more where that came from. So if you want more inspiration from bards, just take little bits and pieces from characters like Jareth from Labyrinth, if you want to go that route, really over the top.
The ultimate bard.
Yeah.
David Bowie.
Or you could do, from Kung Fu Hustle, you've got those harpists.
They were terrifying.
Yeah, they were really cool. Mad Max, of course, had a bard in it. The newer one. The intense...
The guitarist.
Blowing fire.
Yes, yeah. That's a pretty intense bard.
He set the mood, for sure. Scott Pilgrim.
Totally.
Yeah. The Rock. And any professional wrestler. Any professional wrestler is really a bard. They're putting on a really entertaining show, and they're masters of it.
Holy shit, feigning injury is totally a bardic performance.
Yeah. Oh, you could work that in. That'd be a great little twist on your combat. Just going over the top with it. You've got Ferris Bueller, who's not a typical bard, but I was thinking about that movie, which is amazing, and he does all kinds of bardic stuff in there.
Yeah, he gets the entire city of Chicago going on a parade float.
Yeah. Who but a bard could do that? I'm pretty sure he did casts disguise self at a certain point to pick up his girlfriend from school.
That's totally true. Well, I think that just about does it, huh?
Yeah, I'm going to stop talking about movies because I can do that forever.
We can go down this road for a long time. So thanks to Tabletop Audio for all of our sound effects and all of the sounds that you hear in between our show segments. Follow us at Hook and Chance on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, Discord. Our Discord is starting to get a little bit more traction, or at least we're organizing it better.
We're putting it together better than we started. So thanks for putting up with that.
Yeah, hop on there and give us some ideas. We tend to be on there when we're writing episodes and things like that. So hop in there and make your voice heard.
All the interaction that we're getting has meant so much to us, and it's really cool to start becoming a bigger part of this community. So we appreciate all of it. We appreciate you checking out the podcast.
Whenever we hear that, hey, yeah, I shared it with my bud, that makes us feel pretty damn good.
Yeah.
So thanks for listening, and play great games.